Hello gamers and welcome to another exciting edition of Game Warp. I'm Elwood.
I'm Kim.
And tonight we're going to be talking about Night School's Afterparty. Afterparty, for those not familiar with the game already, is the follow-up, much anticipated follow-up, certainly for ourselves, to the Night School Entertainment's first game, Oxenfree. This time you play a couple of college students who somehow end up being sent to hell and find that the only way out involves taking on Satan and his cronies in a drinking challenge. And so begins a very unique journey, much like Oxenfree, through the land of hell, as you meet interesting characters and sinners alike, and try to find out why you ended up in hell in the first place. Now, Kim, I mean, this was obviously a game we've been very excited about since it was first announced. I think it was announced at E3.
Yeah.
Or perhaps a little bit before. And it's really great the fact that it came out and it went straight on to Microsoft Game Pass, which is really quite handy because Microsoft at the moment, when it comes to these little independent titles and their own titles, putting everything onto the Game Pass has just been really fantastic, and it's meant that PlayStation in many ways have had to kind of step up their game and put out their own version with obviously the PlayStation Now, which has been fun to look at as well. But obviously they've not had Afterparty, which has obviously been a big draw for ourselves. But first impressions, really, I mean, we're obviously going into Afterparty. There's many things that are the same as Oxenfree, and at the same time it tries many different things. I mean, what was your initial impression of Afterparty?
Obviously, I liked it because, a lot of the strengths of Oxenfree still stayed in Afterparty.
Yeah.
So, you have that very comic book style of dialogue and, the choice-driven story, which really, Night School Studio does really well, is that your choices actually make an impact, and the different choices that you make will change the ending that you have, and it's never certain how many endings there are, and I think I've only read right now, I think there's 3 endings, at least 3 endings is what I read somewhere. So, I mean, the color palette is really nice with the neon pink and, the design of the characters, and the whole premise is so wacky that it's kind of interesting, because sometimes the wackiest ideas are the ones that really deliver on, you never, it takes you by surprise on where it could take the story.
Definitely so, and I think this is something that Night School Studio have really done well with their branching narrative games. When we compare obviously to the likes of Telltale, where it felt very much on rails, even though it was given this sort of illusion of that your choices were going to matter, ultimately you still follow the same path. With Oxenfree, and certainly with this game, the choices you make certainly feel like they have an impact on the journey that you're taking, and certainly with the experience the characters are having and how they're sort of interacting with each other. And certainly with this game, there's a big sort of emphasis on facing up to previous sins, and also the choices that you're making are going to affect the ultimate outcome of the game. And it's all made all the more fun because obviously with Afterparty it presents itself as this fun party game, and at the same time you've got more serious tasks that you can be accomplishing that may ultimately help you more than just doing what you think the game wants you to do, which is obviously to get as absolutely blasted as possible. But I mean, we obviously have our 2 characters here, this time Lola and Milo, who you switch back and forth, and they're played by Janina Gavankar and Cole Dale, 2 really great voice actors. We also have Ashley Birch, who shows up as Sam the demon taxi driver as well, in a more sort of subtle role than we've come to expect from her performances. And I was kind of surprised really, because I thought that she was playing one of these 2 leads, because certainly with Lola, Janina does sound kind of very similar to her in her sort of tone, and especially in her sarcasm. So,
well, I mean, Sam is still a rather central character. Yeah, they're not the leading 2 characters, but Sam is kind of like the bridge for them, like these newbies into the underworld, to, learn about this Satan's playground, all these different islands and all these places. And they're like she's like the taxi driver and the guide, right? So it's very, it's an interesting character that she has. And, as a story goes along, Sam also has quite a bit of depth. I eventually figured out a twist in her character, but it's interesting. Like it takes a really nice turn, and I think that as a somewhat supporting character who appears in all your journeys back and forth, which I'm very thankful for, because this one journeys you through taxi driving and a nice conversation with Sam instead of having you, like most other games, trek through the land yourself.
Yeah, certainly I was happy not to have another trek for the island like we had with Oxenfree. I mean, the back and forth between locations is cut down significantly by the fact that you're taking taxis everywhere, and it also means that the studio's not having to constantly find a way to bridge every single location by having just like generic sort of backgrounds and stuff, and giving them more sort of space to create some really interesting backgrounds, because every location you go to is just absolutely bustling with different characters. There's conversations always happening in the background, and there's even social media pop-ups that appear and give like little nods to what you're doing or what other Desians of Hell are currently up to on this really random night out. At the same time, this vision of hell, it's very different from every other vision of hell we've seen, as it's not so much about howling souls and fire and brimstone, but instead it's kind of like a neon district of nightclubs and just bars and just people having a generally good time, which is kind of confusing because
well, I mean, we had it during the nighttime, and in the beginning you kind of get the idea, Milo and Lola get there, and they really they sign in pretty much for what type of hell they're supposed to get, and hell only operates from 9 to 5. So they're pretty much there when things close down and they're ready for their night out, and they haven't figured out, they don't even know what's gonna happen to them yet, but they're there for the ride right now, just to have fun and find Satan and figure out how to get out of hell.
That's right, because obviously Satan at the center of hell throws the biggest party. He's currently on his 1 millionth party, or so the flyer constantly keeps telling us on the loading screens, and at the same time he's entered into a bit of a slump, but he's the only way to get out of hell, and the way that you do that is by basically beating him in a drinking contest, of which we're told only 2 people have achieved, and one of them was a raptor. Really want to know where that story went, but sadly we don't find out as far as I'm aware, so but it's, as I say, it's very sort of confusing. I mean, obviously, when we do the check into hell, and you've got the different people who are like being sentenced to their sort of torments, and that's about as as sadistic as things get. After that, everyone just seems to be having just generally a good time. It's kind of hard to see it as too much of a punishment to actually be stuck down here, just because of everyone just hanging out in bars and generally just having this huge sort of like social occasion. It seems like the place to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's until our dear friend Wormhorn starts popping around all over the place, and but Wormhorn's purpose was really to, I think, bring some backstory to Milo and Lola, and at the same time, it would be really that. Every time this character would appear, I'm not sure if it's a girl or a boy right now, but I think it's neutral sex at this point, that, Wormhorn would show up, it would be kind of signifying the end of a segment that you've gone through and what you've achieved, and kind of in their own way, kind of telling you what choices you made, whether, they were good or bad, and, in that, in the sarcastic tone that's presented to them.
Yeah, Wormwood is obviously your personal demon, whose only job, it seems, is just to aggravate you as much as possible. As you said, she or he. It is very hard to tell what this demon is supposed to be, but it basically turns up and gives you the rundown and criticizes or rewards your choices, such as the medical student who's day tripping to hell because he wants to have a preview of what lies ahead of him, so he keeps having these attempted suicide attempts to land in hell, and because he's a day tripper, you're sort of tasked with tracking and identifying him down before sending him to the ninth circle of hell, which ultimately seems really harsh, but you're actually, when you get the rundown by Wormwood, it's like, this is what you should have done. So it's kind of sometimes the choices aren't always the most obvious one of the paths you should be taking. It's like, do you engage in like a dance contest, or do you try and reunite this demon with his wife? You've got to sometimes think which of these options is going to be the most beneficial in the long run and like improve your sort of standing, or instead of just like what sounds like the most fun, which is it's one of the many sort of weird mind games the game sort of plays with you, much like when it decides to delve into like the past of your characters and throws these little tormenting plays, which are kind of mean-spirited to say the least, especially when everything else is so upbeat. To have these sort of like really downbeat and really sort of they're just so
but at the same time I think that as downbeat as they get, it's kind of like these very sarcastic segments about just kind of like this outside person telling you about it's kind of reevaluating your life and you seeing how it is, and to see at this moment for the majority of the game, we don't know why Milo and Lola, how they even died and got to hell, and we don't know why they're in hell, and those are those questions which kind of linger in the background all the time as they try to get out. And, you don't know whether you're helping two people who were meant to be there or not, because while, Lola is that, sarcastic and very, I don't know, kind of very, like, cynical kind of character, Milo seems like one of those, just let it flow sort of characters as well. It's, it turns into kind of like what Wormhorn does in this process is that it kind of questions their choices while still giving their character some kind of like depth into, who they are and, what all this is, and maybe even see, the problems with their friendship and those different things. And those are, those are the little moments, where, Wormhorn tries to break their friendship apart, and it's up to you whether it succeeds or not.
Yeah, definitely. So, and another interesting aspect to the game is the actual drinking aspect. As every bar you can go into, you can purchase a drink, and you're normally presented with one of four. There's normally four options presented to you, each with different sort of side effects to them, such as there's a drink called Bluebeard's Last Wife, which makes you talk like a pirate. And often the drinks tend to just provide you with a humorous third option when it comes to the dialogue tree, so they'll occasionally give you, by taking drinks, you can have bursts of confidence, as certainly the case in Milo when he loses his moral compass when it's stolen by Wormwood.
And then he jumps off a balcony.
Yeah. So the drinking element, while I can never sort of like fully grasp what drinks were supposed to do what, I mean, occasionally, as I said, like when you have Bluebeard's Last Wife, it's a little obvious because you suddenly start talking like a pirate. It just provided a fun alternative like a fun third option when neither the two options being presented to you really sort of appealed, that you could just take a drink and just say something in your head sarcastic or funny. But the dialogue as a whole, I mean, for a narrative driven game, it is kind of nice to see that the dialogue is really sort of engaging, and as I say, it's not just the conversations you're having, but the conversations happening around you. The obviously downside is this being that it requires you to have a lot more attention and makes it a lot harder to play as sort of like a casual game, because it requires so much of your focus to fully take in everything that's going on. So I found that that was a slight detraction from the game, is the fact that I just sort of like had to think to myself, oh, I'm going to be playing this game, I'm going to need to have the time to focus on this, because otherwise the game just rolls on regardless if you make choices and becomes kind of like a very expensive cartoon. So it's
yeah, but I see your point, but at the same time, Oxenfree was that sort of game also, where as you walk along, your characters and the characters around you will constantly be talking, and those choice bubbles will keep popping up. I actually think they gave you more time this time to react to it, as you know, the dialogue went on by someone else talking, and whoever you were controlled with would have to, you know, would you know, present a problem that you'd have to answer to, or some kind of comment or something like that. I don't have a problem with that. I like the continuous conversation. It gives kind of like a better flow to the story in my mind. Whereas like I don't really like the fact where, you know, there are games where you need to approach someone and have a conversation and that sort of thing. I really like, you know, just being, you know, automatically like the conversation just starts by itself. It feels, you know, obviously a little bit more linear because the conversation will always be the same when you get to that same spot. But I mean, like always be the same as in like, say I had one time where I crashed and I came back into the game, and then the conversation I had like that Lola was saying at that time was the same comment as before. So, you know, these things are, you know, it just depends. Like in a game like this, it has its attraction for me. Like I don't mind, like it definitely does take more attention, but I don't really think for me it's something that bothers me as much.
Okay, and obviously with the prospect of multiple endings, and certainly there is, as you were saying before we came on air, there is actually an achievement for swearing as much as possible. I think if you swear 20 times in the game for your dialogue choices, it gives you an achievement point for that. Yeah. So does it sort of inspire you to sort of go back and replay it to find those alternate options? Because often with these games where they give you like multiple endings, it's like, does the appeal to like go back and redo it all again often really isn't there. It
always, I think that Oxenfree was the first game where I was really, really interested in going back and really like actually beating it, right? Actually getting out of the loop of what Oxenfree was, because, you know, for people who haven't played it, that's pretty much what the game is. And the same for Afterparty, I think, is the appeal of it is how to get out of hell, whether you're actually able to get out of hell. And for me, I'm going to say right now that I made choices which I knew would land me to, you know, make me stay in hell. But I decided to make those choices. But I'd really like to go back and, you know, try a more, I don't know, maybe more like the whole swearing, more vulgar way, and try and see if I can figure out, you know, the different paths, because there were other options, as we were talking off air, where you chose that was different from me, and we ended up having a different story path in general. And I think that that's the very charming thing, is that there's so much to discover when you have games like this that give you the options of, you know, choosing different paths from other people, and it gives it so much more replayability. And, you know, Night School Studio is one of those companies which has such good storytelling skills, and so much, you know, their storyboard is so, you know, vibrant and wonderful to explore, that you kind of want to go back and see, you know, what other endings there are, and what maybe end up in some quirky ending that, you know, to see what would happen.
Definitely
if
so.
you took
and
the other path.
Part of me almost wants to see these two characters branch off and have further adventures, because they are such a fun double act, especially as they make up for each other's flaws. So obviously with Lola, it's very sarky, and Milo is very sort of more cautious, and they balance each other out. The prospect of the fact that they're facing life apart from each other is hinted throughout the story, and it's, as I say, you could just see these two just going on a series of outlandish adventures, not necessarily in hell, but through just different sort of adventures, like do something a little more horror based, or do something more sort of like
Yeah.
throwaway sort of like puzzle based or something like that. There's numerous sort of like paths I could see these characters being taken on, and just because they're so much fun to hang around, I just kind of want to see more from them.
Well, yeah, for sure. And you can even, go back to before they had all this stuff, right? Give their character a bit more depth in, whatever they went through. But I mean, at the same time, if we did have something more with these characters, like a sequel or something, which I don't think is going to happen, because then that would mean they'd have to set an ending that was meant to happen. Like the linear ending that, that they had envisioned to happen. And I feel like Night School Studio, the reason why they give you so many endings is because it's really the choice that you make that lands you where you are. And it's hard to see what the intention is the final goal to get out of hell, or maybe during the journey in hell it's changed your mind, especially because hell isn't as cold or as horrible as it all seems to be.
What was that first person game? Was it Torment or Agony? Yeah, certainly when we compare it to Agony, that obnoxious little first person game, it was certainly a completely different view that we're getting here, and certainly one that's a lot more fun to be around, because it's not about shock and gore and that. It's just basically about the fact that in hell everyone's got a job to do, and when outside of office hours everyone just likes to go and have a good time. So it was certainly an interesting take.
It would be interesting to see, because there's a lot more backstory to Afterparty that could happen, and a lot of it revolves around the Satan and his posse, and this whole world underground that has so much more possibility, because they keep also talking about their version of kind of like heaven and God and his involvement in all these things. And if the story were to branch further into that, and in the case that Milo and Lola's endgame was supposed to be in hell, then there's a lot more possibility to that. And it'd be one that I'd definitely be willing to go check out, mostly because Night School Studio has such great narration that I would expect great things from them in the future.
I don't think they've announced what they're working on next.
Well, they never do so soon. Remember last time Oxenfree, it was like a year after that they announced their next game. So I would say that they probably have something in the works, but they're not going to talk about it probably until at least
what are we
next year or
giving
something.
Afterparty then?
I think I would give it about a 4 out of 5. Oxenfree, we both gave 5 out of 5s. It was our top game of 2015 or something, 2016. This one's a little bit not quite as good, I think, but it's still a lot of fun and very entertaining. There are really great elements to it, but I think that one of the things was that maybe Game Pass was what it was meant for, like the Xbox was what it was meant for, because PlayStation was laggy as heck. Oh my goodness, was it lagging. I had so much lag. It was so it was very I kept thinking it would crash, and then eventually it did. So I had some technical issues playing against it as well, from the console I was playing on. So, but everything else really, really did work well, and I just felt like it was a bit more linear than Oxenfree.
It's the same.
So that's 4 out of 5.
It's not quite on the same level as Oxenfree, certainly not. And that was the thing with Oxenfree.
Well,
it sort of lured you in with
so.
these pastel color schemes and charming the characters, and the idea that they're just hanging out on this island and working on their friendship, and then suddenly the darkness of the island sort of drew you in. And I mean, Oxenfree was a game which you could be terrified winding up a radio, and when it comes to Afterparty, it's very much a completely different beast. It's much more about just having fun and sort of exploring those those sort of like dialogue options, and just as I say, it's just a very dialogue driven game. And there was just certain moments that it just didn't really sort of it didn't fully sort of click or feel like the full picture that I was expecting. So, but it's, as I say, it's still an enjoyable game and certainly one worth checking out. And more so if you've got the Game Pass for the Xbox, just definitely add it to your download pile there. It's one of the indie titles definitely worth checking out on there.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe, and give us a comment. It's always appreciated. You can always check out all our reviews on our blog, gamewarpblog.wordpress.com. You can also check out some of our social media, which is on Twitter and Facebook, Game Warp Podcast, as well as Instagram, where we share a bunch of little gaming things and gaming snacks and all those things that we like to look at. And that's also a Game Warp Podcast. So till next time, bye.